Welcome everyone to this town hall on campaigning with a disability. My name is Melissa Graham. I'm the project manager for MLPD. My pronouns are she, her. I'm really excited to have you all here today. It's our first of our 3-year project with Elections Canada to do webinars on campaigning and elections with a disability. And we have a really great slate of panelists to start off with. I'm very excited and happy they could all be here. I'm going to let them introduce themselves more thoroughly, but just to give you a brief introduction, I'm just going to go from the bottom to the top of my screen. We have Whitney Hodgins, who is an honorary council member for MLPD, and we have Councillor Gilroy of the Daniel Mclntyre ward, and we have Jennifer Howard, who is a former Manitoba cabinet minister. I think I had that right. So I'm very excited to have them all here today. Couldn't have asked for better panelists. I think it's really great that we have not just 3 people that are involved in aware of the disability community, but 3 female panelists too. It's really fantastic. So really looking forward to this conversation today. So I'll get started with the questions unless anyone has any questions in the room to start off with. Okay, so my first questions was for the panelists, and you can take these in any order. Whoever wants to speak first can. Can you please provide us with a short introduction of yourself? Tell us a bit about who you are.
You're unmuted, Cindy. You go for it.
Okay, so I'm Cindy Gilroy, and I'm the city councillor for the Daniel Mclntyre ward. And I found out that I had learning disabilities at a very young age. I really struggled in the school system, and I basically had gone to many different schools in order to try to manage my learning disabilities. And so the school system was a pretty difficult time for me. And I decided to get into politics, which I think is our next question, so I won't get too much involved in that. But yeah, I live with a learning disability, and it's impacted my life from a student, and even as a person that a person at home. It impacts my family as well, and of course my work on council. So I'm looking forward to discussing that a little bit more with you, and how I work with that.
Thank you, Cindy.
I can go next. I'm Jennifer Howard. I'm here in Ottawa in the unceded territory of the Algonquin people. I now work with the NDP for Jagmeet Singh. I was previously elected in Manitoba as a member of the legislature, and I got the privilege of serving in cabinet, got the privilege of being a minister responsible for people with disabilities and part of bringing in the Accessibility for Manitobans Act, which is one of the highlights of my elected career for sure. I was born with a mobility disability and lived with that all my life. And yeah, I sometimes use things like a scooter or walker to help me. I've used those more as I get older, not because I think I need them more, but because I am wiser as I get older and I'm less willing to put up with pain and all the rest of those things. So yeah, that's who I am. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Jennifer.
All right, so I'm Whitney Hodgins. For those who don't know me, I was a federal candidate in election 44, representing the NDP in the riding of Brandon-Souris. And so a little bit about myself is I live with autism, and I was diagnosed at the age of 14. And since my diagnosis, I've been an active advocate in the Westman region and now across Canada for the better part of the last decade. This has gotten me quite a bit of recognition lately. The most recent being the Jim and Jeanette Munson Autism Leadership Award, which is a national award that represents the work that people who are out there in the community who are striving to push for a national autism strategy. So that's mostly what I've been up to. But when I'm not being an advocate or an activist, you can find me going to my day job, coming to panels like these, both as a viewer or as a participant, and just overall just enjoying my time here. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, all of you. So my very next question, which Cindy alluded to, what made you decide to get involved in politics?
I guess I'll start with this one. So I got involved in politics strictly because of my disability. What started me is I had 2 kids at home, and I was really terrified after the experience that I had within the school system, and you know, how it was a blow to my self-esteem, and dealing with a lot of issues that I had personally because of my learning disability. I was terrified that my kids had it. And so I didn't want them to go through the same issues that I had in the school system. So I actually ran to be on the school board. So that's how I got started. And I think what was critical for me is that I really saw myself in people that were living below the poverty line. Now, I'm very fortunate. My family was able to help support me and get me the supports and the counseling I needed and all the stuff that I needed. But I know many people fall through the cracks. And if you look at our incarceration rates, a lot of the people that are incarcerated, majority of them have learning disabilities. And a lot of the people that are living in poverty have learning disabilities, and I think you'll find that with the disability sector overall. So it was a really concern of mine, especially with young women. So that was something that really drove me, and wanted to make sure that there was some changes within the school system, that they were dealing with you know, educating people differently, and making sure that we're educating our educators on learning disabilities was critical, because I really think that making sure people our kids stay in the school system was really vital in order for us to find their natural gifts and talents and their abilities. And once educators find that, they can find where we put them. Because unfortunately, our system's basically set up for people that if you're really good at math or science or English, it's set up for you in that direction, but it's not set up for you on other gifts and talents that people bring. And so it's a failure within our school system. And I really wanted to make sure that we were looking at those other measures of our students' success than our academics. So that was something that was important to me. And so it was really my disability that drove me into politics. Thanks. Yeah.
I just wanted to say to Whitney, I was the NDP candidate in Brandon Service in 1997. So it's kind of cool to be on this with you. I really grew up around politics. It was my mother was very involved in politics. My grandmother was involved, and so it was just something that was always kind of around. And you know, I think my mother was very clear with me that in order to make change, in order to make the world fairer, in order to make sure that we could get the things that we needed, you know, the one way to do that was by electing people, and in my case, by electing New Democrats. You know, all through my life, I've needed kind of special modifications on my shoes, and you know, we really, you know, didn't have the money like a lot of families to pay for those things. It meant a trip into Winnipeg from Brandon to get them fitted and bought. And you know how fast kids' feet grow. So it was twice a year. And I remember once asking my mom, you know, like, how are we paying for all this? And she explained to me that, well, everybody paid taxes and the government collected those taxes and then gave us some help so that I could have those shoes. And I was like, well, that's a pretty cool gig then, getting to be elected and getting to do things like that to help people. So yeah, I first ran in Brandon Souris in 97. I came in 4th. And then I, you know, ran again and won in 2007 in Fort Rouge, and I've worked in politics also. For me, it's just, you know, I've also worked as an activist and worked in the nonprofit world. All of that work is about making change and social justice. for me, I found, if you get the chance to be in government, near government, in politics, that is the fastest road to change things. Doesn't always feel like that. Sometimes it feels like it takes forever, but you can affect change much more quickly, I have found, in politics than outside of politics. And even when it's frustrating, and even when you have to compromise and all of that, there's still tremendous reward in knowing that something you've been part of has made a change in people's lives.
Thank you.
Yeah, so for me, what got me interested in politics kind of echoes the same thing that Cindy and Jennifer have already touched base on. I come from a single parent household that was low income. And so for us, getting by was very hard. And at times, like, I was even giving my babysitting money that I would earn myself and give it to my mom so that she could have milk money for us for that week. Like, no kid should ever have to make that decision ever. And here I was at age 12 doing it, And then I got into student politics before I became a political figure. And Jennifer Howard might know this student union very well, the Brandon University Students Union. I served there for 4 years. And during that time, I really honed in on my advocacy a lot in those 4 years, spoke to a few different bills strictly to post-secondary education. And then immediately after my time at the union, I was still speaking to bills in legislature post-union. And what I had found typically was that the people in the seats right now were not genuinely aware of the impact that their decisions were making on everyday people. And by everyday people, I mean the low-income people, the BIPOC community, the queer community, the disabled community. All those communities are impacted by the decisions that are made in the legislature, in the House of Commons. And so when I decided I wanted to run, a large part of it came from wanting to help the everyday person. And at the end of the day, I also did not see someone like me in those spaces. And that was a problem, because when you're supposed to be in these spaces that are supposed to be inclusive, and they're supposed to be made up of so many diverse individuals that are supposed to represent the demographic of our country and make decisions on behalf of our country, then why are disabled candidates not in that position? Why are they not being represented the way that they need to be? And so that was one of the biggest factors of why I decided to go for politics, is because that representation absolutely needs to be there, not just in federal politics, but also in provincial and municipal politics as well.
Thank you. Now steering the conversation a little more towards campaigns. What's been your experience on campaigns?
So I like Jennifer, I did grow up in politics, but I never really thought, even though I really wanted to be a politician, I never really thought I could because of my disability. And so I was around politics a lot, but one that really kind of moved me the most in learning how to take my disability and putting it to good use, because I have dyslexia and I can't even say the word, I apologize, but it's a math kind of dyslexia in a math realm. And then I have ADHD. So one of the things that I did on one of my elections that I worked on was Kevin Chief's election in the North End. And they wanted me to run the E-Day campaign. And I'd never had done that before. And I just was like, no, like I was just terrified that I would screw it up. Like that's way too much organization. There's a lot of organization that goes into campaigns, and the person running E-Day, that's even more, right? And I was like, how, because of course, part of my disability is being organized, and keeping a whole bunch of things juggling at once is not usually something that people with ADHD is good at. But what I did find out is with my ADHD, I'm hyper focused. So I was able to really hone in the good parts of my disability and really go with it. And that campaign opened up kind of opening for me to really understand how I can be way better at some of the jobs that I thought I could never take on, because I could use it as a strength, right? And so, you know, I was able to really, I used sticky notes and I did what I thought would help my brain instead of kind of going the old school way, what some of the other people that were running campaigns were doing. I took a different approach to it. So I think that sometimes, and I'm not going to talk about all disabilities, I'll just talk about my own from what I, when you're scared and you think that your disability can hold you back, there might be things within your disability that actually can actually be a strength. So I was able to find the strength within my disability and work for my advantage. So, and we did very well. We won the campaign. So I felt that I was a good part of that campaign, and it really opened my eyes to what I can do even with the disability, and how maybe my disability could be a strength in some ways.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, so I've worked on campaigns as a volunteer and a staff member and a candidate. I probably started as a teenager because it was something that I was interested in. It was a good way to learn. And one of the great things, maybe it's about all campaigns, but the campaigns I've been involved in, I've had a lot of opportunities because there's not always a lot of people around. So you kind of walk in and you get to do the things that you know, want to do because they're just looking for people to help. I guess one of the challenges for me has been there's a big emphasis in campaigning about going door to door. And that's a lot of walking and a lot of going up and down stairs and a lot of dodgy staircases and slippery walks and all of those things. And that is a real challenge for me. And, you know, I think in my first couple campaigns, I really, you know, didn't have, I don't know what the right word is, the confidence, the self-advocacy to be able to say, like, I can't do this like this. I'm going to need to do this in a different way. It wasn't really until after I was elected and I talked to other people with disabilities who are in politics who kind of made me, like, you know, give my head a shake and realize that being a politician wasn't about like who could walk upstairs the best. That was not the competition I was in, right? There was nothing to prove in that respect. And I think all of us with disabilities deal with some internalized stigma and some internalized shame. And I think, you know, probably more so true for people with invisible disabilities because you always are making that choice about are you going to out yourself or not. So finally, I was like, this, you know, I'm going to use a scooter and I'm going to use some extra helpers to come and knock on the door. And then I'm going to talk to the person. And that was a revelation because instead of me being like, oh, I hate this. When is it over? My back hurts. My leg hurts. I was comfortable enough to be able to engage in better conversations with people. And I probably didn't appear so grumpy to the people on the other side of the door. But the other thing about it, you know, like all of us, right, with disabilities, we go through people asking us questions. Oh, like, why are you using a scooter? What happened to you? Are you sick? Are you okay? And we probably go through some people's assumptions that, oh, how can you do this job? I'm sure both Cindy and Whitney can speak to that. But, you know, it is also a way to connect to folks who see your vulnerability or see that you also have struggles in your life. And maybe that means you can understand what they're going through a little bit better. I think mostly in politics, I mean, people are interested in what you think and what you stand for, but they really want to know that you get them. It's kind of what Whitney was saying in her experience, right? Did the people in those seats get what it was like to live her life? And I think, you know, when you have a disability, you have a little bit more of that connection with folks because people know that you have had to struggle, you've had to go through some things in your life. And so maybe that means you get what they're going through. But yeah, I mean, I am not a politician who loved campaigning. Some politicians love campaigning. I would not say I loved campaign. I love the winning part. I didn't love the campaigning part as much. But once I kind of found some accommodations that worked for me, and once I like kind of got over the stigma that I was putting on myself and used those accommodations, it was much better for me. So that's one thing I would encourage, is to really think about, like, what are you going to need to make this work for you? What kinds of accommodations? And be really specific about those. Write them down. Have your campaign staff know, okay, you're going to an event. Are there stairs up to the stage? How many stairs are there? Is there a railing? If you're speaking, are you, is there a stool that you can sit? If you need to read stuff and that is a challenge for you, are there all of those questions that I think we're all pretty used to asking, as part of our life? We also have to train our teams sometimes to ask on our behalf so that we can perform our best and we have the accommodations that we need.
I think that's some great advice, Jennifer.
So my experience on campaigns is very minimal before I decided to put my name forward. So I was primarily being trained up to take on some of these roles in the next provincial election. And so that work has already started for me. Like, I'm already involved in provincial executives of the NDP. And so we're doing that work on the ground right now, because the provincial election is coming. And so for me, that's probably going to be the most involved in a campaign I've been, other than being a candidate. And as a candidate, for me, it was a completely different ballgame. So I was running in the middle of a pandemic. So every traditional idea you have about campaigning, it went completely out the window. You had to be on your toes, adapting, pivoting, meeting people where they were at. If that meant you were going to an outside venue where people were, gathering, but that was the only place you would catch them, or if it meant going door knocking in a smaller community where it was a bit more intimate, like you made it work. I know in my case, there was a lot of challenges for all candidates when that campaign happened. So it wasn't just a disability thing. It was every single candidate across the board had to deal with those challenges. And so I have a very unique campaign experience because of the pandemic. And I would think, because of that, I learned the valuable lesson of really putting yourself out there. So it's not enough to just put up your signs. It's not enough to just go on the doorstep. It's not enough to just talk to media. You also have to be in the community doing things with them. So you have to be visible. You have to be, if that's a community event, they're celebrating some big milestone as a community, good. Go out and introduce yourself, meet them where they're at. Because that in the long run will, especially for rural folks, it will mean so much more and leave an impression on their mind than it would any kind of placard that you throw in their mailbox. And so when I think about my experience with campaignings, it's really just putting yourself out there and being visible.
Thank you, Avi. Those were such great answers. My next question is, how do you think barriers could be removed for candidates?
I think one of the first barriers is this forum. I just want to thank you for putting this on. And I think Jennifer raised something and I'm one of those people that have to put up my hand when it comes to invisible disabilities, which is something I have. I didn't tell people I had one. So it took me a long time, and I didn't do it when I was on the school. Maybe some people knew on the school board, but I didn't put it out there because I didn't think people would say, well, how is she supposed to handle these big budgets and read all these documents? And so I was very nervous about telling people. And it kind of happened for me when I was at City Council, when not the former mayor now, but Mayor Brian Bowman, he asked me to be chair of the Property and Planning and Heritage and Downtown Development Committee, and that's kind of like a minister level at the city of at the province, like Jennifer Howard was. So, and we were doing these really big documents at the time, our guiding documents. So, I was so scared. I kind of had to say, I just want to let you know that I had to have a private meeting with them and just tell them I have a disability. So, I might take a little longer to respond to you, or right. So I had to be honest and open, and he was fine with it. So I think the barrier is sometimes, within us, right? So sometimes, first of all, the forum I think is good because you're allowing this platform to happen so people can hear that there is people out that are in these positions or have been in these positions that have experience with that, and that sometimes the barrier is within ourselves to try to push ourselves beyond what, you know, the things that we're scared about pursuing, right? And so that those are barriers. And another thing that I think is a barrier, especially nowadays, for me, I don't like the limelight. So my husband always jokes with me, you're like the weirdest politician ever, right? Because you're supposed to like the limelight, right? So, I don't like to like tweet things out, and everyone's like, you gotta be on this stuff. So, but social media, I don't know if you guys are on that right now, but it's not always the nicest platform. So coming from a disability background, I already had low self-esteem issues. So you really got to break down that barrier that you're going to have within yourself, and really say, okay, that doesn't reflect you, what those people are saying out there, because a lot of it is very negative, and it's very hard to sometimes put that aside and do your job, right? And then when you have a disability on top of that with self-esteem issues that maybe come from that, can really affect you in your ability. But sometimes that, and which we'll talk about later on, that disability is why you're a good person for that position, right? So that might be a barrier you're going to have to figure out. That's a personal barrier within yourself to overcome, and just know that there's people there that support you, love you, and want you to succeed, and other people that are helping you throughout the way. So those are the barriers, I think.
Great, thanks, Cindy.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's some really practical barriers that we've talked about before, just, finding accommodations. I think that's true for people with disabilities and whatever employment or whatever we're trying to do, we're trying to go on vacation, all of those things we experience. And often the accommodations are pretty low tech. They're not like expensive. They're not difficult. It's just nobody thinks about it. So you have to be advocating for yourself. I think sometimes there is like a lot of concern sometimes in politics about not giving anyone an unfair advantage. And I didn't have that, but I'm just thinking about the campaign in the States that we just went through with John Fetterman in Pennsylvania, who had had a stroke and needed some accommodations in the debate because he had some language processing issues coming out of his stroke. And so he needed the questions written down. He needed to have like a teleprompter. He needed more notes. And oftentimes in debates, there are very strict rules, right? Like you can bring notes or you can't bring notes. And I think there was a bit of discussion about the accommodations that he needs. So I can imagine that being a barrier for people who need those kinds of accommodations to take parts in politics. Just the attitudes, the misunderstandings about, oh, well, is this giving you an advantage? Well, no, actually, it's making me able to compete in the same way that other people compete. I think there is like an attitude barrier still. I think like we face that in lots of different ways. I think Cindy's talked a bit about that as well, like this fear that people will think we're not up to the job if they know about our disability, or if, we're visibly living with a disability. Like, how can she do this job? It takes a lot of stamina, or it takes a lot of this. And so I think, we always have to be aware of that and proving ourselves. And even for me, when I was running, and people realized, oh, like she can't, go door to door for 18 hours a day. And maybe we shouldn't have had her as our candidate, because what if she loses because she didn't go to enough doors, instead of thinking through, how could we maybe help get to more of those doors? So I think there's still an attitude barrier. And I think, for any candidates that are not typically what we think of as politicians, things like mentorship, help raising money, I think is a big thing. Campaigns take money, making sure that people have the help to raise money. There are some better election laws in place now where if you incur expenses related to your disability, you can get those rebated as part of the election. So for me, we needed to hire extra staff who could come canvassing with me. We got to deduct those from our campaign expenses and get help through Elections Manitoba. So those are positive things that help get over those barriers. But yeah, I think attitudes, and, you know, making sure that there's mentorship and help and people to kind of help you figure out how to do this. That is what can help overcome those things.
Awesome. Thank you.
So I was a bit different in that when I ran, the majority of people already knew I was out as an autistic person. Because I had won previous awards for my advocacy and I was known in the community. And so there was no hiding my disability. People knew. So for that wasn't something that was on the table for me. But when it came to barriers, I think the biggest one for me was juggling the fact that at the time of the election, we were dealing with staffing shortages across probably the nation. And for that reason, I could not take a leave from my day job to run in my campaign. And I couldn't afford to just up and leave without pay either. So my vacation got denied. And so I was putting in 15 to 20-hour days on my busy days. So I'd work a 12-hour shift at my job, and then I would do a few hours of canvassing, whether that be lawn signs, door knocking, what have you. And then the remainder of my evening would be eating, answering questionnaires, because there was no such thing as town halls for the most part when I ran because COVID. So you were up into the wee hours of the night answering these questionnaires, and you had to submit them by a particular deadline because each organization was different. They all had different questions. You then had to constantly refer back to your platform package that you were given as a candidate to make sure you were wording things the right way. So there was a lot of behind the scenes, I would say, that was a barrier to me from an economic standpoint. But for me, I didn't really feel the attitudinal barriers. And I think that was because I was authentically being myself the entire time. Like I was out, there's no hiding it. And for people who know me, I was kind of like, well, get over it. It's not like my disability is going to vanish overnight because it's a disability. And so I think with that in mind, the attitudinal barrier thing, sure, there were people constantly criticizing, you know, can you do the job of an MP with a disability? And then there were people who were actually really supportive of the fact that somebody, for lack of a better term, was out there talking about the issues that they had been talking about since the pandemic began. Like some of them were still talking about, you know, the $600 check they were supposed to get, but they felt that that wasn't enough from our government, or that how is it that an able-bodied person could get so much more money, but then people with disabilities got next to nothing. So those issues were constantly being talked about. And I think I think in my case, the fact that I was bringing those things to the forefront and talking about those issues openly, it really did create, it, at least in my riding, a very supportive kind of atmosphere, because I very rarely got treated with disrespect while I was out there. In fact, one person, it was literally the night before E-Day, and I was at my mother's house in a rural community, and they come on their lawnmower and they're screaming as loud as they can over top of their lawnmower engine, and they're saying, Whitney, good luck tomorrow, you know? So the fact that we could have those kinds of small positive moments throughout the campaign, I think at the end of the day is what made the campaign so worth it, despite there being small negativity throughout.
Yeah, sounds like you've had a range of experience. Thank you all of you for sharing that. What advice would you have for anyone who's considering becoming a candidate?
So my advice that I have from my experiences, there is a lot of support out there for you if you want the job. So like when you, either at the school board or even at the city council level that I'm at right now, there is different technologies that they have used to help. So you can listen to all your reports and stuff. So if you want to have it listened to instead of reading them, I know Councillor Edie, who is blind, he has that and uses that all the time. When somebody puts a motion forward on the fly, it gets read into the record. So there is lots of different things and mechanisms that cities can use. And you know what? The one thing is that I would have to say is once somebody comes there with maybe a new disability that they haven't discussed, haven't had somebody in there yet, they have to adapt. Right? So having that person in that role makes sometimes the system adapt. So I don't want people to be scared to go because they don't have a disability, which is I think what kind of our brains tell us to do, because what I see is that once you get there, those adaptations have to take place, right? Because you're now in those elected roles and the reality is there. And, that's up to whether it's the school board, the city government, provincial government, or the federal government. They have to make sure that you're able to do your job. So don't be scared. There's lots of different mechanisms in order for you to do your role and do your job.
Thank you, Cindy.
Yeah, I think, some of the best advice I got the first time when I was trying to decide to run or not was like, you can go back and forth about it in your brain. The only way to really know if you're cut out for politics or if you want to be in politics is to actually run for something. There's no real way to describe what the experience is. You have to try it. And so I would encourage people, if they think this is something that they want to do, to go for it. There are many opportunities to run for things and don't all have to be high stakes, high pressure. I think, try to really give some thought and use your friends or trusted people to talk through like why you want to run. What is it that, that's the most important question that a candidate needs to be able to answer, I think, is why are you running? Why do you want to do this? And really being authentic about that. And I think what Whitney talked about, authenticity, critically important in politics. Don't be the image of a politician that you think you're supposed to be you. The other thing I would say, and I think this is especially true of women, is we often think that we need to know everything before we get involved in politics, right? A common thing I hear from women who talk to about getting involved in politics, I don't know everything. I don't know enough. I don't know this. I don't know about economics and you have to kind of say, yeah, you know enough. You are an expert on your life and your lived experience. You're open to other people's experiences. You're active in your community. You want to make a difference. That's enough. You can learn other things and you will be surrounded by experts in all of that. So I think just, you don't need to know everything. And, I think, like I said before, really take some time to think through what are the accommodations that you might need. Be clear about them. Be clear about those with your team, that they are also going to have to advocate for you. But yeah, I would say just, go for it. There's lots of weird things about being a candidate. Like it's kind of a weird thing to go door to door and tell people that you're pretty great and you know how to do things. And it's not a natural, I'm not suggesting that's what you do when you campaign, but it's kind of a weird thing to just knock on strangers' doors and talk politics to them. But by and large, people are pretty welcoming. People are pretty kind. I can count on one hand the number of actually negative experiences I've had campaigning. Sometimes people don't have time or they're not interested, but mostly, even if they disagree with you, they're happy that you showed up and took the time to listen. So there's not as much to be afraid of as we sometimes think. You can do it, and the only way to find out is to try it. And that's what I would say.
So I think when I was considering being a candidate, it wasn't really necessarily the process of being a candidate. There is quite a lengthy vetting process that I had to go through. And when you were an amateur reporter for the Quill and have been published many times in newspaper articles, your vetting package becomes very thick very quickly. I spewed over that thing for months before I submitted it. But one piece of advice, And it actually came from my agent when I ran in the federal election. And it really impacted me and how I guided myself throughout that election. And they said, Whitney, it's your campaign. So run it like you would any other day. Like, don't run it in a particular way because, oh, you know, this person over here is doing this or this person over here is doing this. No, like at the end of the day, it's your campaign. Do what you want with it. And at the end of the day, if you win, great. That's the outcome you want. If you don't, you still ran it in a way that you would be ultimately proud of yourself when you leave at the end of the day. Because putting your name on a ballot is really hard to do on a good day because you are putting yourself out there. And so for anyone who's put their name on a ballot, and I'm sure every other candidate, past and present and current acting official could attest to this, is that, you know, that's probably something that the majority of people will not do when they have an issue. They won't put their name on a ballot. They won't stick up for their values. And we are a select few that are willing to do that. And so for us, it's a privilege and an honor for us to put our names on the ballot, but it's also speaking to a higher need that we're hearing from our communities, and there needs to be change that happens. And that's why we do it. And so for me, when I ran it, as if my competitors weren't in my blind spots, right? Like, you run in your own lane. And if you run in your own lane as if there's no one else around you, you'll be surprised by the outcome that you will have. So even though I didn't win, which I'm still very happy with my results, by the way, I was able to achieve something that so many people who came before me for the Brandon-Souris riding were not able to achieve. And I got one of the highest ever voter turnouts for the NDP in Brandon-Souris, and I am incredibly proud of that. And the fact that I am a disabled woman while doing so makes it even more something to be special of. And so I think that's probably the biggest piece of advice I can give people who are considering running. Don't focus on what everyone else is doing around you. Focus on you. Stay in your lane as much as it's hard to, because there's a lot of rhetoric going on around you and a lot of buzzing occupying your mind. It's very important that you stay within yourself and stay in the moment.
Thank you, all of you. That was some great advice. Now, here's hopefully an easier question. Why do you think we need more disabled candidates?
I think everybody's experience is really needed at a political level. And I'll give you some examples of that. So, you know, probably why I'm very interested in issues pertaining to poverty is because I really see myself, if I couldn't get a job, like, you know, because I struggled so much, I didn't graduate like everyone else did from high school, right? I didn't have the same level of university entrance. I had to wait to go to university later on because I couldn't get a university entrance. Like, I saw myself kind of those people that fall through the cracks. And even now, like when you go back and you listen, like part of my dyslexia is you can't find the right words to say match, and you can really see that when I talk. So if you go back and you watch me talk, what I'm thinking and I'm processing, but I can't necessarily say the right words or don't come out properly. So, but that doesn't mean that I'm not really good at making really good policy, right? That really helps support, I think, some of the most vulnerable people. So one of the things I've got done from the city is I got a poverty reduction strategy, the city's first ever. That was something I did and I pushed for. The low income transit pass, the WIN pass, is something I pushed for. And, you know, and getting an affordable housing strategy at the city. And that's something I really pushed for. So those things wouldn't have happened, I think, if I wasn't in the room helping make those decisions. And that's from my own experience and what I bring to the table. And another example I wanted to give is as a councillor, I went out to this gentleman that was blind and used a seeing eye dog, asked me to come out and check out Portage and Dominion Street, which is by CNIB see, right? And he wanted me to come out and see the snow clearing, and his dog couldn't get close enough to the pole in order to push the button to get across the street because we were putting the snow there. Now that's that person's experience, right? If he didn't drag me out there, I never would have thought of that as something that would be something we would need to consider as a city. So I think everybody comes to the table with something special to offer. And a lot of times in the disability sector, those are things that haven't been said before or haven't been talked about before. So we really do need people at the table making those decisions. And I just encourage anyone that has disabilities to not, have that barrier inside you of, I can't do it, because you can. There's many people that I think here have shown you that you can, and there is supports out there for you to do the job that you need to do. So we do need people with many different disabilities to come forward, and because your voice does matter, and it matters in the policies that we make at the different levels of government.
Yeah, I think we make better decisions when we're all at the table. That is the truth of it. I've been around a lot of decision-making tables where I've kind of dawned on me, oh, like they don't get it. They don't understand why this isn't going to work the way that they think it's going to work. They don't know what they're leaving out here because they haven't had those experiences. And so I think we just, we're going to have better policy. We're going to have better laws. We're going to have better budgets. When we're all at the table. And, I also think like the powerful do not need more people to advocate for them in the halls of government. They will always get their stories told. They will always get their perspectives through. But people who don't have a lot of power and who frankly often don't have the time or energy to engage in politics do need champions, do need advocates desperately. And I think often that's, where we come in. That's where we can be effective. So yeah, I think it's just, we make better decisions when we have all of those perspectives. But, I also just think we need more champions of people who don't tend to have power, who don't tend to have voices, who don't get their stories told, whose needs aren't considered, when policies and budgets are being made. And people with disabilities, because of our lived experience, not all of us for sure, but many of us can be those champions and those advocates.
I would definitely echo what Cindy and Jennifer have already said, in that it's important that people living with disabilities have their voices heard. And it's important that those voices are around the table of these policymakers and decision makers. Because as I've mentioned, I've sat in on, bills coming down the pipe, and I literally have to sit there and tell them, do you not realize that by essentially doing this, you're going to create this? And they go, oh, we never thought of that. And so it's really important that we do have people around those tables at all times, not just for a proportional representation perspective, but so that the voices continue to be heard. Because the only way to create lasting change that's going to benefit not just the 1%, but also the everyday person, it's having those people from everyday backgrounds that are going to create that change to be more equitable for everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah. I also think a lot of the things that people with disabilities have advocated for, as we know, end up benefiting everyone, right? Like that is also true. I remember somebody telling me, the biggest users of closed captioning are not people with hearing disabilities. They're people in noisy bars and on treadmills at gyms. That's who those are the biggest users of closed captioning, a technology invented for people with disabilities that, many of us use in our everyday. So when we're part of the consideration, we actually end up making better things for everybody.
Well, all three of you have been so incredible. Thank you. I want to give you a time to, we still have time for anything else you'd like to add, but also there are a couple other people in the room. If they have questions, I'd like to invite that as well. Well, I'll just say, I know I didn't admit this up front, but I have a little bit of experience running in campaigns, and I'm just in awe of all three of you actually going through with the whole process. I only have a little bit of taste of just how much, you know, it is something you have to commit to, and it's really important to have people around you to support you, as I think you all have said. And just for representing the community, I think that's so important. You guys have touched on all of this, but I think oftentimes when we get decisions made by people that don't have our experience, that's when things go wrong. And it takes so much longer to correct a decision that's not helpful than it does to have like good, solid decisions from the start. Joelle, I see you unmuted there. Did you have something?
Yeah, I did, Melissa. I just wanted to indicate that I ran as a Liberal candidate for the provincial Liberals in 2002, and that was before I became disabled. And I've often thought about, wow, I was so lucky to have had that experience before my multiple sclerosis reared its ugly head in a big way. And so now I use a scooter and some of those things. And I think, wow, I just can't imagine trying to do that now. But I think it's been really incredible and fascinating to hear from you guys about, you know, campaigning and taking on your roles with disabilities and how you've succeeded and some of the things you had to say. And I have to say, in the last, hour of however long we've been talking, my perspective has shifted that, yeah, it might be a doable thing. So I thank you for that.
Thanks, Joelle.
One thing that I want to encourage people to even just to start doing, that I know with the city of Winnipeg, we're trying to actually figure out how many people have disabilities. And a lot of people don't, and I was put to blame for that, because I've asked the questions, well, how many, have invisible disabilities, because I'm interested in that portion too. But lots of people just don't want to talk about it. So I think that a barrier for us also is to try to start talking about it in your workplaces, so it becomes more like of a norm, and so that our workplaces start to change and make sure that they're being more accessible to people with disabilities, because that's where it starts, because our workforce also has to reflect everybody that's out there. So that's something I've been trying to encourage at the city of Winnipeg. And so for all of you that are on the call, whether it's the workforce. And another thing, I know that there's my husband's a union guy, so he ran for his union. So there's other kind of positions that people might want to run for too, like the unions and stuff, that look for guidance and support from people you might know. But it's to look at maybe just making sure that you're telling your workforce that you do have a disability, I think is critical as well.
Thanks for that, Cindy. And with that too, I want to acknowledge, I'm glad that those of us in this room seem to be, empowered by that label of disability. That's worked for us, and it's been a strength for us. But we have to remember too, that hasn't been a strength for us. It's not a label that gets applied equally, particularly for BIPOC folks. That's been a label that's really been used to exclude people and really add an extra layer of marginalization there. I think there's work to be done in that area too, but there are also people out there doing that work. I think it's a really exciting time to live in, that we actually do have, disabled candidates that are representative of the communities they live in, and it allows change to happen much faster than I think it used to. I'm not sure if anyone else has anything they want to add, but I'm just really grateful you all were in this room. It was really interesting to hear all of you go back and forth, and I hope people take the time to listen to this recording and hear what you all had to say, because it was really inspiring for me, and I hope it'll be inspiring for others too.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Melissa. And it's been just great to have this conversation.